Good morning. I'm glad to be able to present two examples and two models that are focusing on key lessons in governance and inclusion levers. USAID had the opportunity to work from 2002 through 2008 through two pilot programs. One was called the Gender Informed Nutrition and Agriculture Alliance, which we refer to as GINA, and also the Agriculture and Nutrition Advantage. From the onset, these two programs focused on organizing leaders within country. From 2002, we were looking towards the leadership of Mozambique, Nigeria, and Uganda. We worked with the countries and coalesced with them, worked beside them. They were the experts. They wanted to form multi-sectoral teams so that they could design action plans to reduce hunger and malnutrition, particularly of children under the age of 5. And so we proceeded at that time in organizing representatives from agriculture, all parts of agriculture, including plants, livestock, the extension service, the research service. Also on this team of experts were from the Ministry of Health, wherever the nutritionist was in the Ministry of Health, and also those health experts. We also organized as part of the team, and essential to the team, those who were going to be implementing the policy and working with government to implement the policy. And in this case, it was the NGOs, World Vision, a local NGO, Food Basket Foundation International, AfriCare. We also recruited the agricultural research institutions to ensure that when we were working with the farmer groups, that there was access to the latest cultivars and plantings and seedlings and extension services. We also had on our team those who had anything to do with moving the agenda forward in country, including the National Planning Commission and, in the case of Uganda, Makerere University. And I must say that even after 7 years, we're still together as a team in our GINA team. And I'd like to recognize Professor Tim here today for all of his support in Uganda, and Professor also Chikafunda, as well as some of our other team members who served on the GINA. So we're still here. Thank you very much. At the onset, GINA and TANA started with the enabling policy environment. These programs began at the national level to look at what were the existing agricultural policies, what institutions were in place, what was the capacity of those agricultural institutions. The policies regarding the poverty reduction plans, the plan for the modernization of agriculture. We also looked at the nutrition policies that were in place. What was the capacity of the nutrition institutions in country? For example, in Mozambique, we looked at the Technical Secretariat for Food and Nutrition and what was their policy in terms of reducing hunger and malnutrition. In the case of food security, we looked at all of the food security policies in country, and it allowed us to see where that country was in the development of the policy and whether additional capacity was necessary and whether the policy was just sitting on the shelf. Where was it in the implementation phase? This process took us 3 years, just in looking at the policies, ensuring that the policies were current, determining how the policy could be carried out at the state level, provincial level, and then at the local level. So what I'd like to do is share with you at this time some of the lessons we've learned after 8 years of trying to translate policies and action plans into program implementation under this GINA model. We learned that you must take a top-down and bottom-up approach simultaneously. In so many cases, the policies are there. It's not that the policy is not there. The policies may be older, they may need to be revised, but they're sitting on the shelf and not being implemented. And so we wanted to work through this multiple ministries, and that has been mentioned many times. You almost need a full-time coordinator to work across these ministries. It takes an extraordinary amount of time. And we learned that it's not enough to stop at the national level. We needed a leadership network, not only at the national level, but at the provincial, sub-district, state level, and then again, advocating at the local level. What was the purpose of the network? To advocate for the reduction of malnutrition of children, to advocate and promote nutrition in government. And so those were some of the lessons we learned. Oops. The second set of lessons learned had to do with focusing on evidence-based advocacy. So that when the teams were assembled, we said there were the agriculturalists, the nutritionists, the health experts, the gender experts, the NGOs. We focused on how do we relay this message at the national level and then also at the state level and again at the local level. So we always had an semblance of case studies, literature. We use profiles, which many of you know focuses on nutrition and its impact on economic development in country. And so we went into the ministries armed with that information to make a compelling case. And so many times in the government offices, malnutrition was not recognized in the country. But when presented with the evidence and presentations, many of the ministers and many of those at the state level said, okay, we understand what it is you're trying to do. That information had to be broken down to a very simplistic level once we got to the local level and working with the chief councils and working in the community. What does this all mean? What is malnutrition? Why is it important? And so the evidence-based advocacy became very, very important. The other lesson we learned had to do with the participatory processes and involving the community in any decision that was going to be made. This committee, this program, did not parachute in with any pre-designed programs. It attempted to involve the community in making decisions about the type of activities that were going to be implemented within the community regarding agriculture, some of the nutrition activities, growth monitoring and promotion, and those were some of the activities that we focused on. We also noted that there was a lot of time needed for capacity strengthening, and this is the area we probably underestimated most of all. We had to spend time in capacity strengthening in terms of this country-led approach, project management, focusing on accountability, financial management, in addition to bringing in the technical skills that were necessary and strengthening some of the agricultural technology, some of the nutrition skills in growth monitoring and promotion. The last lesson learned had to do with gender analysis and letting everyone know that gender does not equal women. We looked at the mores and the patterns in the society and the paradigms in society regarding gender and worked on the intra-household distribution of food, the intra-household distribution of resources, and bringing women into some of the decision-making. Not excluding men, but bringing men into the process wherever possible. So that summarizes the lessons learned. We were extraordinarily pleased in Nigeria, and I will just highlight some of the policy outcomes under the GINA model. Under President Obasanjo at the time in Nigeria, we were able to launch the first food and nutrition policy in Nigeria in 30 years. We considered that a very, very significant outcome of the GINA program. We also established multidisciplinary advisory committees, again, not only at the national level, but at the local level, so that there was a continuance of advocacy, advocating for the reduction of hunger, advocating for improving the nutritional status of women and children. Finally, all of this has to have a human face. What is the human face of this policy? The human face is that of improving the nutritional status of the women and of the child. And under this model of GINA, we were able to improve the nutritional status of 3,000 children in Mozambique, Nigeria, and Uganda. We consider this a very small pilot, but it allowed us to learn a lot of lessons about what it's actually going to take if you are going to implement a country-led process, if it is going to be multidisciplinary in nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for this extremely compelling presentation of GINA, the mapping of institutions, the leadership networks, the linkages between policies, programs, and actions provided a package that I suggest each of you to think how replicable and what elements of those could be used in other countries and in other situations. Thank you very much indeed. Last but not least, we are moving to our fourth panelist this morning, Mr. Manoj Kumar, Chief Executive Officer of Nandi Foundation in India. Manoj, please, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes.
I want to thank IFPRI for this opportunity to bring in some voice from civil society in India in this very complex question. Is that okay? Okay, yeah. So I wanted to thank IFPRI for giving this opportunity to bring out maybe some voices from the community in India and maybe represented through a civil society voice. Before I get started, I'll have maybe 3 disclaimers. One, I will be restricting myself. I see a very pluralist global audience here, so I'll be restricting my talk to the Indian context. In that sense, parochial. But I should say that we have the distinction of maybe the world's largest number of small and marginal farmers. We also have the distinction of the world's largest number of malnourished children. So in that sense, maybe very contextual, despite the parochial geographical limitation. Second disclaimer is that the inclusion levers, particularly, I'll be restricting it to the 2 broad spaces. One, the fact that policies and schemes probably often exclude these 2 segments that I mentioned, which is small and marginal farmers, as well as mothers and children, in the context of anything that India have ended up creating as policies. And so how do we include them would be what I would focus, and examples from the field on that. And the third disclaimer is that the governance pitch that I shall share will be more in terms of examples that have been essential for good outcomes, which included the whole idea of what I just heard Cheryl speak about, the need for evidence-based advocacy, which eventually leads to a political demand creation. Because the 2 segments that we are talking are often either completely voiceless, 0 to 5 children, or small farmers whose shoutings are not heard enough in the echelons of democracy. So how do we bring out these examples? Those are the disclaimers. I'll start by trying to highlight the fact that, we in India have a situation where nearly 80% of farmers are landless, small, marginal. Traditionally, they brought food to our dining tables every day. And we have a situation now with economic reforms, with globalization, with opening of markets, and with the right kind of resources coming in, and hopefully the right direction, the whole ship moving, we still find that they have to now stand in queues to get basic food grains. Basic coarse grains, as day before yesterday, Dr. Swaminathan called them nutritional grains, the millets and the rest. So for that, they have to wait in queues to get through the public distribution system. It's an irony of sort that the essential nutrients that they were used to eating traditionally, the essential nutritious food that they were offering to the rest of the food basket of the nation is deprived from their plates. So this whole irony of new economic templates changing the plates of these farmers' portfolio in their homes is one issue that we have been seeing in close quarters working with communities across India. And to my mind, a colleague of mine was telling the other day, it's the issue of the 3G scam. We in India have a 2G scam going on a different plane. The 3G scam is about, grains, greens, and grams missing from the plates of small farmers. How do we get these 3Gs back into their plates? And if we can probably look at that, we would probably have got the mix of nutritional security for small farmers who also happen to have children who are malnourished addressed at a practical level. So what kind of inclusion levers and what kind of governance solutions have we found from the country so far? Similar situation is the fact that we have the largest 0 to 6 age group feeding program probably the world has ever seen, the ICDS program, for those of you know already. It's a multi-billion-dollar program. Why do we, despite having this for many decades, and now almost in every district in the country, why do we have 1 out of 2 children in this country malnourished? So what has been the exclusion there? It's been an all-inclusive program. It's been well targeted. The goal has been defined. Why still do we have this problem? So can we look at 3 specific small examples that I will highlight, which probably have answers to this? One is, and then before I explain that, I'll spend a line on what kind of an organization do I represent in a sentence to say how we have been fortunate to hear these voices, to see these inclusion and governance examples in close quarters. Technically, we're a not-for-profit, but we have a revenue model of outsourcing not so well-run government programs and implementing them on behalf of the government, which would mean, therefore, feeding 1.5 million kids every day, all of it, incidentally, with fortified with vitamins food that we give, or working with over 300 small and marginal farmer cooperatives across arid lands in various parts of the country, working with the indigenous people in the hills who also represent the malnourished population. We have a 20,000 group that we work with separately. And specifically, combining, which typically not-for-profits have not been used to doing, what I call as the 5 Ps, ensuring that public sector projects are outsourced, so we closely work with the public sector, bring in private sector engagement. Some of private sector is considered anathema to look at social issues, so just include them strategically into what we do, even if it's an engagement for advocacy. Work closely at the village level with the panchayats, which is my 3rd P. Ensure that philanthropists are brought to engage in discussions, particularly if not anything else, on coming out with measurement metrics, because government by default, are very good in inputs, but suffer when it comes to independent assessments, independent metrics to look at evidence-based results. And lastly, work very closely with politicians. In a vibrant democracy like ours, we have learned the hard way that unless you include the polity in what we are doing, we're not going to have it sustained. And many of these excluded sectors we are talking are not able to bring in the political will needed because they don't have the voice. So that's been specifically a work that we've been doing. So the 3 quick projects, one we did was a project with the World Bank. It has been a 5-year longitudinal study in a portion in in a place in central India where the indices of children and women's literacy and nutrition have been one of the lowest. And we called it the Project Bachpan, meaning Project Childhood, if you please. And this was with the state government, trying to see if we actually, at each village level, and this was a block of 230 villages, each village, if we could include all the players who are the opinion makers to play the role of a community-based body, that will bring in the convergence and the accountability that the government systems need to do, to see whether that by itself can create some levers that are not functioning to work when it comes to implementation. That was one objective. And the second in that region, in this Project Bachpan, I just want to highlight that the World Bank is soon going to release this report, and so it will be available as public document. But the second was to see that women and mothers, can we help them understand and recognize whether their children are nourished or not? And in that case, if we do that, can we empower them to know what should they do? What calls should they make? Whom should they access? And how do they tackle it? If we did this for 3-4 years, very determined manner in, say, in these 230 villages, we wanted to see through third-party measurement, would the indices related to child's health go up? And I'm happy to report that it tremendously went up. There was no external input needed, no external food needed, no fortified food came in this case. Now there is a demand for all these from the community. It's a separate story, and it is very welcoming. But the just empowerment of them with the right knowledge and the integration, and that's in that context, the conference itself is very heartening, that you have brought these different segments to talk together. So we realized in Indian context, you had the health department, the rural development department, the women and child department, the education department, they worked in silos. And to get them together at the village level was the challenge. And to empower them and to make that framework work was the example that we felt made a lot of difference. And the second example has been the need that we need to actually bring in advocacy. So we had to bring together a huge movement in the form of getting multi-party politicians, elected parliamentarians, to go around the country and do advocacy, expose them to the problem of nutrition, expose them to the problem of interlinkages missing. And now they have championed us to come out with a citizens report, which would be an evidence-based advocacy. The citizens report is going to measure where are the children? What is their problem? And how do we ensure that we have heard the voices of women? So we're coming out with the Hunger and Malnutrition Report led by this group of multi-party politicians, where an independent body comes out with the primary data of children and their existence and the pockets where they're existing with malnourishment very high, and what do their mothers think about their perceptions and understanding of malnutrition. The jury is still out on that. We should have the report coming out, but in the places that even I could go personally and listen to them, what was very overwhelming is the fact that wherever there have been financial incentives by the government in terms of policies, be it for institutional delivery, be it for accessing coarse grains than the polished, nutrient-less, deficient rice, there have been examples where the behavior of the community changed to accessing them. Policies and incentives played a tremendous role in their behavioral change. Also the fact that, by and large, women did not have experience of identifying whether the children are malnourished or not. And the very awareness that could be created by simple tools made them completely empowered to go and create a demand that they didn't have. So the last example, and with that I conclude, has been our work with the indigenous people. They've been growing cash crops, and we've been providing them the marketing linkages. This is coffee and black pepper. We found to our horror that all of them were also missing from their plates the three Gs, and so were nutrient deficient. We realized that we had to include the government's policies and incentivize this group of indigenous people to opt for this kind of diversified legumes and greens and grams production as part of their agricultural portfolio, so that they would come back to it, because the economics of it didn't make sense for them to do any of these original nutrient crops, and so they were stuck to the cash crops, although we were party to that crime. And only when we pulled the levers of inclusion using economic means, using governance means, and legitimized how much it is relevant bringing in this biodiversity, that we saw a huge change in the whole hilly region that we were talking about, where they were great towards biodiversity. So to conclude, I think we need financial policies, we need inclusion mechanisms which are created by maybe civil society and other players in helping the voice of these people reach the policymakers, and thereby ensure that the 3Gs are back, that the mothers have the incentives to do their role, which is to look after their children in a manner that is purely based on informed decisions. Thank you.